Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's the Monday show with me, Andrew Musgrove and Mark Crothers. We're here to reflect on Newcastle United's 2-1 defeat to Sunderland up at St James's Park and the wider impact of that result on the Magpies and Eddie Howe. As always, a huge thanks to our sponsors NordVPN and Saily. You can click the links in the podcast description box to get an exclusive discount on both products. If you've gone on holiday and want safety while browsing on public Wi-Fi, NordVPN is for you. And Saily offers that network coverage at affordable rates. Mark, welcome back to the podcast. Newcastle, as no one will need reminding, lost 2-1 to Sunderland despite taking the lead early through Anthony Gordon. Goals from Talby and Brobby sealed the win for Sunderland and a league double. It pretty much ends United's hope of European football for next season, whilst also adding pressure onto Eddie Howe. We've got a lot to discuss, but just sum up your feelings on what you saw yesterday.
Not an easy one to answer straight away, but look, I think often around derby fixtures, you sort of win, lose or draw. Sometimes you have to come outside of the bubble and look at the bigger picture and look at it rather than just looking at it from a regional point of view and getting carried away in the bubble. But I can't shake the feeling that the manner of yesterday's defeat, the manner of the performance, should sharpen the focus on the failures of Newcastle United this season. Now, when I say that, I don't mean just Eddie Howe. I don't mean just the players. I mean from top to bottom, the failures of the club, the shortcomings of the club, where they've fallen short on and off the pitch since last summer. The departure of Paul Mitchell, the wait to bring in another sporting director, the lack of infrastructure that was put in place to cope with the impact of last summer, but then also on the pitch as well, and with the coaching team, the inability to find solutions to problems that are long-standing. Now, we sit here every Monday and sometimes twice a week, and I feel as if we have the same conversations about the same problems, about the goalkeeper, about the strikers, about the back four not working, about the midfield not having the right balance. Now, we are told that the coaching team are brilliant solution finders, but I feel as if they are still looking for solutions to problems we've discussed from pretty much day one of the season. So, yes, we are here to discuss another disappointing derby defeat and some of the comments afterwards, which are ridiculous, internally, I should say. But I think there are wider conversations here about how this, again, as I said at the start, this latest derby defeat, should really sharpen the focus on what's going on at the club from top to bottom.
Because they've lost a game in similar fashion to how they've lost games already this season. That's the big frustration. For me, I hoped sleeping on it would have allowed the anger to subside, but it really hasn't. And having watched the game back this morning, I'm so disappointed with Newcastle United for so many reasons, and we'll get into them as the show goes on. But I think what the most worrying thing is for me is that I'm not entirely surprised by what happened. And I think a lot of people watching and listening to this won't have been surprised either by the way the game played out, because if you've watched Newcastle United week in, week out this campaign, then none of what you saw on Sunday afternoon would have come as a shock to you.
They are weak. They are weak physically and mentally. The team that we saw throughout the seasons when Newcastle qualified for the Champions League, throughout last season, at times when they won the Carabao Cup, that team was built on strength, mental strength and physical strength and power. And there was games we could sit here and talk about where they overran opposition. Even going ahead after 10 minutes yesterday, they never looked comfortable. Now, I think going back, 12 months, maybe a bit longer, if that Newcastle United back then got one ahead, they would have gone on to win the game. But yesterday, there was never any moment where I sat feeling comfortable that was going to happen. I'm going to say this, and it will be unpopular, but I think fair play to Sunderland, because I thought they played the game and the occasion perfectly once they got over that initial kind of self-inflicted road bump with a ridiculous goal they gave away. Now, I'll be honest, if that happened the other way around, I don't think Newcastle recover from that. And I think that's really damning. So I think there is some really serious questions to be asked about mentality once again. And this, again, is something we've discussed all season. 22 points from winning positions dropped would put them where in the league if they didn't drop any?
Well, if all the other teams also, they would put them second.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I actually did the numbers this morning roughly, and if everyone else was given the same fortune of not dropping points, it would probably put Newcastle United somewhere between 4th and 5th, which is obviously still a massive improvement. And it is just there's just a fear, isn't there, every time Newcastle United go one up, and it's a dangerous scoreline at the best times, but it's so dangerous for Newcastle United. And how many times have we sat there and we've just urged them on to go and get a second, hopefully a third, and they just haven't done, and then inevitably they've crumbled, especially in the second half. And we're going to talk about all the reasons that Newcastle United eventually lost to Sunderland, as we say, as the show goes on. But I want to start with the team news, because I think Eddie Howe got it wrong with two big calls. Anthony Elanga, first and foremost, was the wrong decision to start him out on the wing. I understand why Eddie Howe has done it to a degree, because Elanga scored 2 in the new camp. He should have a little bit of confidence within him. And Eddie Howe's, I think, trying to tap into that and trying to build on the momentum, because I think he thinks, and to a degree I hope he's right, that once Anthony Elanga clicks, we're going to see the player that we saw at Nottingham Forest. But look, Sunderland were always going to sit back and frustrate, which meant Newcastle United were going to have the majority of the ball. There wasn't going to be any space for Elanga to run into. There certainly wasn't going to be too many chances to move the ball with pace going forward, and that's Elanga's game. This just was not the setup for Elanga. And the boos and the groans that quickly sounded every time he got onto the ball, because he played pretty poorly. There was misplaced passes, there was bad touches, there was running down blind alleys. So the groans and the boos, I'd never like to see Newcastle boo their own player, but certainly the criticism, I think, of Elanga, it wasn't like it wasn't totally unjustified, because he did have a particularly poor afternoon. But I feel sorry for the lad that he's been dropped into a game, a formation, a setup, which pretty much everyone can see he was going to have a bad afternoon. And my big concern about that is that any good faith that he managed to build up with that performance in Spain last week has now been taken away, and he's probably gone 2 or 3 steps backwards because of how badly he played on Sunday. And look, he certainly wasn't the worst player out there, but he wasn't very good. And I think it was pretty much confirmed that Eddie Howe got it wrong within 2 minutes of Jacob Murphy coming off the bench, because as soon as Murphy got on that pitch, the one thing he's good at is the one thing he did. He got the ball, he put it into the box. It was a dangerous ball in the box. Again, Newcastle didn't score, nothing came of it. But how many crosses did Elanga put in the box yesterday? And that was the difference. For me, that should have been Murphy's place on that side nailed on.
I think the surprising aspect of that was that generally we'll go back to Murphy in big games. I do think you're right that he has maybe selected Elanga purely because of what he did on Wednesday against Barcelona. And again, to a degree, I agree with you that that is it probably felt the right move because of the fact you should have that confidence, as you've just said. But I just feel as if in these sorts of games, when 8 defence is going to sit in a low block, there's just no space for Elanga to work into. Whereas Murphy can just get the ball out his feet and cross it and, pose those problems. But again, this goes back to recruitment, doesn't it? It goes back to last summer and the recruitment that took place. I dare say another one will come up, another 2 will come up before the end of this podcast. But I just felt that the team selection some of it was puzzling. And I realise I'm saying that with hindsight, but, it was just disappointing from the start. I mean, Elanga, you hope, he started pretty positively with that header. when he probably should have hit the target, if we're honest. But then after that, just got frustrated, and I feel as if, when he drops deeper and tries to come and collect the ball, I'm never confident that he's going to hold on to the ball. And to be honest, that happened a few times yesterday where he's come deep, probably done the right thing to come and support Trippier, but then just wandered and lost possession. Now, as you just said, he's by no means the worst on the pitch yesterday, worst player on the pitch. And there were certainly a few candidates for that tag, by the way. But I just really I fear for him going forwards that this move just isn't going to work. And I've defended him this season, and I've sort of retained faith with him. But sometimes you have to ask the player just to show a little bit. And I just don't think we've seen it enough from him.
The other big call was Nick Voldemare. Now, there's a lot of debate whether he was a number 10, whether he was in midfield. Eddie Howe suggested that he was indeed playing as a number 10. The average position map suggests otherwise. He was rather quite deep. And I have to say, again, it's all good saying this in hindsight, but if you listen to the match preview and what have you, there's not a chance Voldemare should have been deployed, I feel, as a midfielder. I feel that's where he was playing. Obviously, Eddie Howe is the only man that can argue otherwise. But for me, when you look at him, he was playing deep. He was clearly given the instruction to kind of mark Xhaka, which, to be fair, he did very well for the opening 20 minutes before Sunderland made the tweak. But I don't think he should ever have been in the starting 11 in that role, and it should have been Joe Willock.
Yeah.
The gamble with Voldemare hasn't worked. It won't work. And this was another roll of the dice where pretty much everybody could see which side it was going to end up on. It should have been Joe Willock for me.
I mean, we should say one of Joe Willock's first actions was to run a ball out of play when he was under no pressure. But again, in hindsight, I agree. I think...
But I mean, look, a penny for Joe Willock's thoughts. You've played really well against Chelsea.
Yeah.
Okay? And we all know your future's probably not here on Tyneside. And people who follow the podcast will know I'm not a huge fan of Joe Willock. I've called for him to be sold in one of the last two windows. Obviously you've got to have the buy and what have you. But for this game...
No, I agree.
If it's between Joe Willock and Nick Voldemare in the midfield, you play Joe Willock simply because it's his natural position.
See, that's the biggest thing for me, is that you play sort of Willock, Ramsey, and Joe Linton, and all of a sudden it looks a little bit more of a balanced midfield. I think Voldemare, when the game got sort of a bit more frenzied in midfield, he kind of got bypassed. And that's not any fault of his own. It's not his position, and he wasn't playing as a 10. As you say, the average position of the game, his average position in the game shows that he was forced into deeper positions where he's uncomfortable, and that's, by no means am I pinning the blame on the defeat on him, by the way, because there were some brighter moments in the opening stages. I mean, he set the goal up with a great first touch and good pass as well into Gordon, and I feel sorry for him. I really do. I feel sorry for Nick Voldemare. I think he's come in under a lot of pressure. He's probably started too well. Now, I remember someone not sat too far away from me saying that you worried about what could happen if he goes on a run of games not scoring or not making an impact. And I just feel as if at the moment, the comments last week from Julian Nagelsmann were quite pointed, weren't they, when he said that he needs to be playing closer to goal. He more than likely will start as Germany's number 9. You just think it's just gone a bit wrong. And I think that's down to the decisions of the coaching staff and the manager, that it's just not working out for him. I still think he can have a future, by the way. I still think he's good enough and young enough once Eddie Howe or whoever's in charge at the start of next season figures out how to get him into a system that works for him. But that feels a long way off at the moment.
Is Nick Voldemare good enough for Newcastle United, and I strongly believe it will still be under Eddie Howe, to rip up what they've known over the last 2 to 3 years and build a system and a team around Nick Voldemare?
I would look at that wider and I'd say, is what Newcastle have been over the last 2 or 3 years what they should carry forwards, or do they have to evolve? Because I think if you play with the same style for too long, you get figured out. And I feel as if, to a degree, Newcastle have been figured out this season. So they have to evolve. Now, we were told that there was going to be some sort of evolution this season, but they've regressed. They've gone backwards. There's no doubt about it that every fact and figure and statistic tells us Newcastle have regressed massively.
On to war flags then. because they promised something big and they delivered. It was a great display. It really set the tone. The atmosphere was brilliant, set the marker. And to be fair to the Newcastle United players, for the first 10, 20 minutes, they responded. They were lively. They were chasing. They were closing. They were pressing. And they seemed up for it. And of course, Anthony Gordon got the goal with Luke O'Nien at fault. It was pretty much the perfect start, wasn't it?
But yeah, in the first 10 minutes, you think, got the goal. Melker Elberg was looking nervous. Luke O'Nien looked gone already in the first 10 minutes. And, Newcastle was sort of playing around those two and sort of trying to force home that advantage even further. And I think this is where the lack of ruthlessness from Newcastle, after getting that perfect start, when you're faced with the Sunderland side that looked a little bit rabbit in the headlights at that point, with a goalkeeper that looked shaky, with a kind of defender or defensive unit that looked on the back foot from the first minute, it speaks volumes that Newcastle couldn't go and press. They allowed Sunderland to settle after that initial setback, and they allowed Sunderland to get on top. And I think, again, that goes back to mentality.
And that's the biggest frustration, really, is that even before Newcastle get that goal through an error, as you say, their goalkeeper looked nervous. Luke O'Nien looked like a rabbit in the headlights. They've then pounced on that. So they're going to be feeling even more nervous. They're going to be feeling even more out of place. And yet Newcastle United didn't act on that. And that's a real big frustration, because they were there for the taking, really, Sunderland. You're in your own backyard, Newcastle. If there's ever a game to really put your foot on the throttle, this was it. This was it, especially when you go 1-0 up after 9-10 minutes. But as I've seen way too often this season, they go 1-0 up, they take their foot off the gas. Yes, okay, Sven Botman hits the post. But other than that, Newcastle United didn't do too much at all. I actually thought they were still in relatively good control of the game, even up till half-time. But they didn't do anything with it. And the big concern, Mark, is that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and you guys watching and listening to do get into the comments, despite being 1-0 up, and despite, I think, being the better team, I went into half-time concerned, because this is Newcastle United, and we've seen them go in against Brentford, against West Ham, against other teams, against Barcelona, you could even argue, on Wednesday, in a position of strength, of positive feeling, only to come out in the second half a totally different side and ultimately lose the game. And I think there's many concerns, many bigger questions to ask. But when that is your feeling, and I'm willing, like I say, to bet the feeling of many people watching and listening this show, that's a huge worry, because if it's been felt on the terraces, if it's been felt in the pubs and in the living rooms and to wherever you guys are watching or listening to this, then it's certainly going to be felt in the dressing room that there isn't a confidence that Newcastle United can go into halftime 1-0 up and come out the other side and go on and build onto that lead.
The tone for the second half was set inside 15 seconds, because pretty much from kickoff, as soon as Sunderland got the ball, Newcastle on the back foot. And I was watching that, and I said to my son, Sunderland will get back into this, because you could tell, because there was, Talby was causing issues out wide. He was pressing Newcastle back. Brobby, who I realise we may discuss at some point, was pinning Newcastle's back four. And all of a sudden, Sunderland were playing 20 yards higher up the pitch. Newcastle had no answer. There was no leadership, nobody talking, no communication, nobody, getting the troops in and giving it let's get ourselves forward, get out. And that is so disappointing from a team that has several experienced individuals in there.
And that's, again, I don't know how many times have I said that's the other big concern so far on the show. I must be on the 6th or 7th big concern already. There was a moment in the second half where it's after Sunderland get the equaliser, and Lewis Hall gives the ball away. He's, for whatever reason, over on the right. He gives the ball away, and up comes Sunderland. It's Xhaka with the ball. He takes a shot. It's deflected. It goes over the bar. At that moment, I turn to my pal and I say, Sunderland are going to win this game. And I looked at the response of the players, and there's not one player who was responding either with a calm head and saying, come on, lads, let's just calm down, let's regroup, let's be collective, let's get back into this, or with an angry voice who's taking the game by the scruff of the neck. A lot of these players have built their reputation on being leaders, of being that wise head, of being that voice of experience. Where was it after Sunderland got back into this game? Because all I saw was Sunderland growing confidence, Newcastle go into their shell and essentially fight Sunderland on for the win. Because Ramsdale, goodness me, I know he wasn't very good for either of the goals, but without him, that would have been an absolute embarrassing scoreline. Where were the leaders? Where was the experienced players getting this game by the scruff of the neck and saying, you do realise what you're playing for? This isn't just any game. This is the time we're Derby. This means everything to everyone. And you still had 20 minutes to go and find a winner. And instead, they kind of just waved the white flag in many ways. And inevitably what happened. You could see what was going to happen. As soon as they got that equaliser, there was only one team who looked like they were going to win this game.
And you contrast that with Granit Xhaka in the Sunderland side, who was doing all of that stuff that you've just mentioned there. He was hammering some of his teammates at times. There was one point in the first half, where he's had a right go at someone. I can't remember who it was now. But then second half, you could see him encouraging them. And it helped Sunderland grow. Newcastle, for all that they have experienced players, they didn't feel as if there was any natural leaders or any genuine leadership on the pitch. And it's almost... that is one of the most disappointing things of yesterday, that it feels completely avoidable. The game felt entirely winnable, particularly after the first 10 minutes, Yet they still couldn't go on and press home that advantage. Whatever was said at half-time was either completely wrong or just wasn't listened to. Because I can't for the life of me figure out why Newcastle have come out second half and just sat back and allowed Sunderland to come on at them, because we can see by, again, the statistics this season, by the performances, what we see with our eyes, Newcastle aren't good enough to sit back for 45 minutes and repel any attack. And I mean that from, any side they've played this season. They find it very difficult to sit back and see a game out for 45 minutes. Surely they should have been on the front foot from the first minute, that second half. You've got the lead, you're at home, you've got the crowd up. Go and have a go at them.
But I genuinely think...
it's mentality again.
Yeah, it is down to mentality. And I think the issue is, like I say, I think pretty much everyone went in half-time thinking, because the chance to push for it was directly after you'd scored the opener. That's when Newcastle's best opportunity to go and get a second, go and get a third, that was then. And it was a totally missed opportunity, because what was then allowed to happen after Newcastle United got that goal is that the Sunderland manager adapted his midfield. And this is where the game for me changed. For the opening 20 minutes, Xhaka was kind of pinned back by Nick Voldemort. As much as it was the wrong decision to start him, in my view, Voldemort did not do too badly against Xhaka in the opening 10 to 20 minutes. But then the Sunderland manager noted this and he made a tweak. He managed the game. Diarra and Siddiqui just simply delayed their runs, and that was all it took to nullify Voldemort and allow Xhaka to come into the game, and it changed on that tweak. And I think it's fair to ask the question that after 10 minutes of that change, why didn't Newcastle adapt? Why didn't Eddie Howe adapt? You've had 5-10 minutes to see what Sunderland have done, and you can see the positive impact it's had on them. Why wasn't there a change from Newcastle United to gain control, essentially, of the midfield once again?
But I feel this has been a fault of the manager and assistant throughout this season. They haven't really adapted in games, and I think that is part of the reason why they've dropped so many points from winning positions, because you've seen opposition managers and coaches make changes and adapt to whatever Newcastle are doing, and then Newcastle can't counteract that. And I think that's been a big fault of the players and the management team throughout the season. You're asking me why? There's only one person can answer that, and it isn't me. It's Eddie Howe and maybe Jason Tindall. I think it's so disappointing because, how many times have I said this season that I felt as if Newcastle became, and by that I mean Eddie Howe, became muddled in his thinking on the touchline. And I felt as if it happened again yesterday, where there was just changes within the last 20 minutes where you just look and go, and it's just all over the place. Now, when things have been going well for Eddie Howe, there's clear and concise thinking. And you can see why he's made that change. You can see why he's adapted that. But this season, there's been too many times when I've looked at what's gone on the pitch and the changes that are being made, and you think, I don't get that. I'm a bit confused by why he's done that. And it does feel as if there's a level of confusion in the decision-making process. And sometimes that kind of manifests into no change.
Do you think he's struggling with the fact that Newcastle United are in this transitional period? Now, he mentioned Alexander Isak after the game and how that kind of impacted things. But, you know, we were led to believe that this season was going to be one where they go from that counter-attacking, absorbing side of 2 or 3 years ago where they were absolutely superb. I mean, ironically, if Anthony Langer was in that side, he'd be absolutely superb. But because Newcastle United have been found out, and it's not necessarily criticism of Eddie Howe, because I think when you play that well and you go from relegation fodder to the Champions League to winning silverware, you're going to get found out because all eyes are on you. Then the bigger teams and every team has to then look at you and think, wow, how have they gone up the league so quickly? What are they doing so well? But then it's on Eddie Howe and the coaching staff to find a new way to play. And I think they're struggling to become this side who can control the ball, who can have the majority of possession and then can unlock a low block from the opposition. And that is the key for any side who's playing Newcastle United. Just come up here or we'll come down there. Just sit back and absorb. And Newcastle United cannot break you down. And I think that's what he's struggling with.
Yes, but also if you want to transition into that sort of side, you need more technical players. The biggest thing I was going to say the biggest thing we need this summer. It's not at all. But one of the key things they need this summer is someone who can genuinely unlock a defence in key areas. Because, look, let's just say, even if they had a full team out yesterday, so you've got Bruno who can do it to a degree. Tonali's more of a box-to-box. Joelinton's a powerhouse sort of midfielder, although it didn't really impose himself yesterday, by the way. But they haven't got someone who can get into that sort of number 10 role and really unlock a defence when someone sits in a low block. The signings made last summer didn't really fit into a side transitioning to become more possession-based. They were all, or mostly, I would say, counter-attack signings. I think Jacob Ramsey could be that player. But at the moment, he's having to play a bit of a deeper role, isn't he? But again, I don't think that's what they need going forwards. They need someone, and by the way, I don't mean this player, I just mean of the style of a Phil Foden, someone who can play in that role in the 10. James Maddison, yeah, someone like that who can just pick out a pass. And then you look at what's ahead of that. And when you look at sort of Manchester City or Arsenal, their wingers, you look at the goals they provided this season by getting in behind a defence through passes from a number 10 or an attacking midfielder. I just feel the recruitment, again, we go back to last summer, it was muddled, it was rushed. At times, that's how it felt, and it was almost reactive rather than proactive. We know they missed out on top targets, you know, your Mbuemos and Sesco's and players like that. I get that, 100%. But then you just wonder how far down their list of targets did they fall. Now, this summer, I think, is the biggest in Newcastle's recent history. And I mean that because I think there is so much work to do in this squad. And from top to bottom, it has to be ruthless. It has to be. There are too many players now, I think, are approaching the natural end of their time at Newcastle. Some of them have been, well, most of them have been unbelievable for the club. But now is the time for them to be ruthless. Maybe that extends to the manager. I know we'll come on to that. There is a decision to be taken there as well. But I look at players who are, for me, have just approached the natural end. They have to be moved on. They have to be swift. They have to be decisive. The worry is, it's never easy working in a summer transfer window when there's a World Cup. But Newcastle have to be at it from minute one. From the minute that transfer window opens, no matter who's in the manager's office, they have to get players in to refresh this squad because it's starting to look dated, and it looks as if they're starting to run out of ideas.
Let us know your thoughts on the summer transfer window. Get into the comments. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and X as well. Ian says Eddie Howe got it wrong in the second half. Graham says there's a spiral going on here. It'll take a very strong Eddie to come out of the other side. And Darren says if we had those points Newcastle have dropped, we sit on 64 points, 6 points behind Arsenal if the team were able to hold on to winning positions. Bob has come in with a bit of positivity. He says if we have a full squad for the last 5 to 7 games, I think we can still get Europe. Maybe I'm crazy, but this is still a dynamite team if they can get it all together.
Can I just jump in there? So one of the big things we've been told this season is that they need more time in the training pitch. They need more time in the training pitch. This is how they resolve issues. And whilst I agree, I think they can still get Europe. That then places even further emphasis on the summer, because they need a squad capable of playing all of these additional games, whether it's Conference League or Europa League. And I'm still not... Look, I think they can do it. Whether I think they do is another matter. Will do it is another matter. But they're going to be faced with the same problems next season. Admittedly, if you're playing the Conference League, you'd probably find it a little bit easier to rotate. But at the same time, it's still the same schedule. And I just feel as if Newcastle haven't learnt lessons from the first Champions League season under Howe, where they really struggled to get into a rhythm. And it's happened again this year. I think it goes back to recruitment. I just don't think they've done enough recruitment. They haven't done enough positive recruitment to really help the manager and the squad with what has been a really busy season. If they get into Europe next season, I think it's the same thing, which means it's even more important that they do some really positive business during the summer and they give whoever is in charge a chance to really attack a number of competitions.
Yeah, a big summer indeed coming up. We'll get back to the action then in the game. As you mentioned, Sunderland got the equaliser through Talby. I think it's a poor goal to concede. Kieran Trippier had fault here because it just allows Bobby to run, and then when the ball goes back towards the penalty spot, Bobby's just there in space. He has an effort blocked off the line before Talby puts it home. It's a poor goal to concede. And on Brian Bobby, I mean, he was absolutely superb. Genuinely, I think it's the best centre-forward performance I've seen in St James Park this season. He just was so physical. He had that determination. The hold of play was brilliant. The little short bursts of pace. Man of the match for me. And neither Dan Burn nor Sven Botman nor Malik Chow could handle him at all. He had their number. Every time they went in a physical battle, there was only one man coming out on top. He was really, really good, and Newcastle couldn't handle him.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. I thought Newcastle's defence were bullied by Brian Brobby. I thought he was excellent from the first minute. There was obviously when he looked as if he got him behind when he was pulled back for pulling Sven Botman back. I've seen some people say that it was the game changed when Botman went off, but I thought that was just a little bit disingenuous. I don't think he don't think he had a grip on Brobby at all.
A few people text me that as well, and like, what game were you watching?
It's just bizarre. And I think Brobby was the ultimately the figure that decided the game. I thought he was excellent, and he gave Sunderland something that Newcastle didn't have up top. As much as Gordon got the goal and ran around and tried to pressure at times, I thought it was really Brobby that gave Sunderland the platform to go and win the game.
I mean, the equaliser really put the wind in their sails. And Ramsdale having a few saves, important saves to make, one from Chris Reagan and a couple of others. Jacob Murphy was the only man that really threatened the Sunderland goal, having a bit of a shot from distance, which was tipped over. But other than that, like I said earlier in the show, I think there was only one team that looked like they believed they could get the win, and that was Sunderland. And oh my God, the winner. Like, in the moment, it was bad, but having watched it again this morning after watching it last night, I am so angry at the winner because it's just a passage of play which is just filled with Newcastle United doing the same old mistakes that we've seen play out in several different games this season. It's not a goal of quality. It's one where Newcastle United have just allowed the opposition time and space, and Sunderland have capitalised on it. Joe Willock gives the ball away. Sunderland move up the pitch, Forget the final shot that takes it in the back of the net. Let's talk about Granit Xhaka having room in his own half without a black and white shirt anywhere near him to turn, and then pick out Siddiqui in the middle, who's got even more space in the middle of Newcastle United's own half. Joe Willock, who's given the ball away, has then just watched Siddiqui run off into the middle of the park and up Newcastle United, up Sunderland go. Willock's nowhere near him. And then let's talk about how Tino Livramento is in front of Brian Brobby. He's then allowed the striker to step in front of him and has somehow gone 3 or 4 yards behind him, and Brobby's just got to put the ball in the back of the net. It is terrible schoolboy defending. And the worst thing is, Mark, again, it's not the first time this season that teams have come to St James's Park and exploited the space. Just follow your man. It's not that difficult. You know, when you've got an operator like Xhaka, who is so good at picking a pass, you've got to be close to him. You cannot allow him a moment's space. And that's what Newcastle United did. Like, they should have stopped the ball getting to Brobby in the middle. They had the time, they had the distance to do so, and they just didn't. And it's so infuriating to keep coming on this show. And essentially, we're repeating ourselves nearly every single week. The players have got to take some responsibility, and they've got to realise that they are playing for a club that means so much to you, me, to everyone watching and listening. And it goes back to that old saying, if you put everything into playing for Newcastle United, you'll be loved. But if you don't, and you concede goals like that, week in, week out, you're going to get criticised, and you are really going to feel the wrath of fans.
Firstly, I lost count of the amount of times I said yesterday, where's the midfield? More so in the second half than the first, but there were several occasions when you looked in midfield and you had Xhaka and Siddiqui just dictating everything that went on midfield, because around them there was nothing. Now, look, we talk about Joe Linton as an enforcer and this kind of powerhouse midfielder. I don't really remember him laying a glove on anyone yesterday.
I thought he was the only midfielder, though, out of the three that can come away without any criticism. He didn't put in the performance of recent weeks, but I thought out of the three, he was the only one that amounted to anything. And he was being the issue was he was essentially deployed as a number 6.
Yeah,
and straight away you've just stunted what he does, because that's not his role. That's not where he's good at. And I get Eddie Howe's got issues in terms of, you haven't got a Bruno, you haven't got a Tonali, then you haven't, even with those two, you haven't actually got an out-and-out number 6, and that's something they need to go and buy in the summer. But
again, something we said 12 months ago.
But for me, you put Ramsey there, or even you put Lewis Hall there, and then maybe you find someone else to go at left back. And I get, again, injuries don't maybe allow that to happen, but Joe Linton, I think, putting him in that position, you then nullify his threat where he's just running and chasing down absolutely everyone, because what you need is a number 6. You need that discipline, and unfortunately, Newcastle haven't got that disciplined operator in that role.
See, I don't think there's one player in a black and white shirt can come off that pitch and say that they were fully satisfied with the performance, and I include Joe Linton in that. I just thought everything was below par. My big concern was when I look at I'm just getting them up so I can get them right. The statistics yesterday. Sunderland committed 19 fouls. Newcastle committed 8. Sunderland got 6 yellow cards. Newcastle got 1, I think, which was Joe Linton, which was for dissent rather than a challenge. Sunderland won the physical battle in more ways than one yesterday, and that laid the foundations for the win. Newcastle offered very little resistance in terms of that physical nature and anything, they weren't front foot, they weren't in Sunderland's face, they weren't intense, they didn't have that aggression, they didn't have kind of what wins derby games, really. But in terms of the midfield, the second goal, I mean, the freedom of St James's Park for Siddiqui, for was it Lefay who got in right-hand side. I think Ramsdale's made a half-decent reaction save, but he's been let down by defenders around him, because Brobby's got a simple tap in. You mentioned Livramento. I think Byrne was around as well. Ramsdale on the first goal, I think, has to catch the initial cross. I don't understand why he's punching. He's not under massive pressure. But yeah, look, there was a little bit of stick flying around when Sunderland brought in Xhaka and people questioning why they did it. But I've seen quite a bit of Sunderland this season, and I think there's a very strong argument to say he's one of the signs of the season in the Premier League. I think he's been outstanding for them. And obviously, I was covering Sunderland last pre-season for the Chronicle and Journal. And when I covered a few of the friendlies, you could sense he was exactly what they needed, that bit of leadership in midfield. We're talking about recruitment here, and obviously we'll focus on Newcastle because it's a Newcastle podcast. Sunderland's recruitment last summer, they've overhauled an entire squad and made it work. Yet Newcastle have got theirs completely wrong, and there's a complete lack of balance within the squad now. I think that's really disappointing.
I was one of those that questioned Sunderland's signing Xhaka, and now I'd have him in a black and white shirt.
Well, look, I remember coming away from one of the last pre-season friendlies. I think it was Real Betis. And I remember saying then that they need a number one, they need a centre-back, and they need a striker. And they went and got Robin Roofs, who's been one of the best goalkeepers in the league this season. They went and got Omar Alderete, who I don't mind saying, we were talking about him before. You would 100% have him at Newcastle. I'm not saying they should or anything like that. I'm just saying he gets into Newcastle's side for me. And Brobby, he's given them that presence. Yes, he took his time to settle, but he's given them a presence to build around and to take the pressure off them. Now, Newcastle, as I said, the recruitment last summer was completely ill-fitting for what they're trying to achieve. To go from this counter-attacking side to a possession-based side, the signings just weren't the right signings. Elanga included, Voltamora, Wissa, the less said about him, the better. Especially his social media activity. But I just think Newcastle have got it wrong from top to bottom. To go back to what I said at the very start of the podcast, from top to bottom, from PIF, from David Hopkinson to everyone, to Eddie Howe, to the players, they've just got it wrong too many times this season. And that tone was set at the top of the club last summer.
Yeah, like we said, big summer to come.
That was a lot from one goal description, wasn't it?
It was, but all fair and just analysis. On the players you mentioned there, you're going to read out some quotes from Anthony Gordon, which I know have infuriated you.
Yeah, look, Newcastle didn't put up a player for written press interviews after the game by all accounts yesterday.
Thoughts on that, first and foremost? You've got to come out and answer the tough questions, haven't you?
You do have to come out and you do have to face up. But at the same, and they should have done that, by the way, but at the same time, all you get is, we apologise, we'll make it up to the fans, we've let them down, blah, blah, blah. It's just words. That's it. It's actions. And again, that goes from top to bottom of the club. I'm sick of hearing, we apologise for this, we'll do better, we'll improve, we'll make, we've got 3 weeks on the training pitch now, great, brilliant. But you know what mattered? 90 minutes on the pitch yesterday. But Gordon's comments to the club's official media yesterday, obviously they were picked up straight away by, wayside-based papers, and rightly so, because if I was them, I'd be laughing at this. So Anthony Gordon said when he was asked about which of the defeats hurt more against Sunderland, both are just as bad, but the way we lost the game, we went ahead 1-0, the way we were playing, I thought they, meaning Sunderland, were really poor. And then we let them into the game and basically gave them the win. The frustrating thing is, in my opinion, they're not a very good team compared to us. We shouldn't lose to them. Now, show some humility, show some self-awareness, and just, there's absolutely no need to say something like that. Sunderland have beat Newcastle home and away this season. They've done the double over them as a newly promoted side, by the way. I'm not going to say outplayed them. They've outfought them. They've outbattled them. They've outmaneuvered them. They've shown more intensity. They've played the occasions better. They've taken 6 points, in my opinion, deservedly. There's just absolutely no need. And look, again, I'll say this. We spoke about this. Newcastle fans get accused, Newcastle fans, players, as a club as a whole, get accused by the Sunderland counterparts of showing arrogance. And comments like that just don't help at all.
Yeah, because there was 3 standout.
It's pathetic.
It is, and there was 3 standout performers for Sunderland. Mentioned the centre back, Brian Brobby, and Granit Xhaka. And obviously Xhaka's probably come to the end of his career, but the other 2, if they were offered to me playing a black and white shirt, I'd take them because they weren't just impressive yesterday; they've been impressive all season. And the centre back's going to play for a top side. He'll be the Man City in a few years' time.
I get what you're saying about Xhaka, but I think the style of player that he is, he could probably play for another 3 or 4 years at Sunderland or wherever else. These comments, I mean, I know people that cover Sunderland in the media and certainly Sunderland fans are laughing at these comments in the right to. Because if it had been the other way around, if Granit Xhaka wouldn't have come out with those comments, by the way, but if he came out with a comment like that, you would laugh back. It's a complete lack of humility and self-awareness from Gordon. And it's infuriated me because you just think, there's no need. There's absolutely no need. It makes it look stupid.
Total lack of respect, isn't it?
It is a lack of respect to his side that no matter what Newcastle think of Sunderland, they've earned those two wins. And I know the one at the Stadium of Light, you can say it was slightly fortunate because of the nature of the goal that decided it. But at the same time, I thought Sunderland played the occasion better at the Stadium of Light. And they certainly did yesterday at St. James's Park. So, yeah, show a bit of respect and show a bit more humility.
Yeah, indeed, 100%. At the end of the game, the players did their usual lap of the pitch and were booed, which was the first time that they've really felt that in many, many years. I mean, there's been some bad results here and there, some exits and what have you from cup competitions. And this season there's been some, shall we say, disappointing outings. But that is the first time that, especially the Strawberry Corner, have made their feelings felt like that. I guess the first question is, was it right to still do the lap? And secondly, is there a wider implication to those boos?
In terms of the lap, what would we be saying if they didn't do it?
Yeah, which I guess is the other side of the coin, because they'd get criticised if they just went straight down the tunnel. But I mean, by walking around the pitch, you've also just set yourself up for what happened.
But maybe it's not a bad thing. Yeah. Maybe it's not a bad thing that they are fully aware of how frustrated and angry fans are. So I think in that sense, if some good can come out of it, then maybe it is that. There was a thing from Howe yesterday after the game in his press conference when he said about hurting. Do you think the players are hurting after yesterday?
I would hope so. Do you not? I think
they're disappointed, but I don't think they're hurting. I don't think they're hurt. I don't think it impacts on them the way we want it to. Some will. We can name them. Dan Burn will. That'll be hurt because Lewis Hall probably will because he was brought up a Newcastle fan. And if they are hurt, who are they hurt for?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. The week's been absolutely dreadful.
Oh,
You've been thumped 7-2 in Spain. You've then lost to Sunderland in a derby. And, you might not feel it. You might not wake up in the morning or have that, that build up with that week of tension because you're a professional footballer and to some degree you've got to be separate from how the fans feel. Okay. But I still think just walking around the city in the build up to it, reading whatever you do online, coming into the stadium, you should have some sort of feeling of what it means to the fans. And even if you don't feel that inside, which is totally acceptable if you're, from another country and, it's not your hometown club, I get it. But you're playing for Newcastle United. You're playing for these fans who pay your wages, and you should be able to at least understand how they feel and work to make sure that they go home happy.
You said should 5 times in that, 4 or 5 times, and I hope they are. I hope they're really hurting. I hope they're waking up this morning thinking.
I think Joe Linton gets it. I do.
I hope so, because
you mentioned Dan Burn. I think there are players who get it. I think without Bruno, that's a huge loss because he 100% gets it, and he's the drive, and he's obviously the captain. But I just wonder, in many ways, whether what we saw in the second half, and your question, whether they feel the importance of it, whether it's more than just that game, whether it's more than just losing to Sunderland, is it a kind of a collective fatigue of the entirety of the season? All those games, the fact they're 12th in the league, the fact you've been thumped 7-2 to Barcelona, is it more important to look at the bigger picture? Like, it's not just about losing to Sunderland, it's actually about the bigger picture of, what is left of the season, what's going to happen in the summer. Is it bigger than losing to Sunderland?
Well, I always reference a bigger picture, but I just feel after yesterday, and I said at the very start, that I think sometimes with a derby defeat, you've got to look beyond it, beyond the region, beyond that, look at the bigger picture. But I feel as if the manner of the second half yesterday should sharpen the focus, to go back to the phrase I used, on certain aspects of what went on. I think I hope they are hurting. I really do. I hope they are. And I hope they're not just hurting because they've lost a couple of games. I hope they're hurting because of the manner of the performances. And I hope we see a response from that.
Well, we hoped we see a response from the defeat in Spain, but we didn't. Steve says, do modern day footballers feel the pain of a fan? Of course they don't. Kieran says, I didn't mind them doing the lap. My thoughts on it was, I think Eddie told them to go around and listen to the boos, as he knows himself, and the team deserved it, and to accept criticism. What we'll do now is we'll hear from Eddie Howe, of course, had his press conference after the game. And this is a clip where he talks about the criticism coming his way.
Yeah, very, very painful. Most of all, painful for our supporters. And they're the ones I think about now. I've got very little to sort of use as an excuse, and I don't want to go down that road. Never have. I never believed in that method. Once you haven't performed and you know the size of the game and you don't deliver, you expect to be criticised, and you understand why. So I understand the reaction at the end of the game. We haven't done our jobs well enough today, and we're desperately disappointed in ourselves. And yeah, I think we have to absorb it, and all we can do, the only thing we can do, is try and come back stronger from it.
Now, what I will do is I'll praise Eddie Howe and say it's refreshing to have a manager in the hot seat at Newcastle United who can stand up and take the criticism on the chin, because we know previously there were managers who literally thought they were above it, and that's never the case. So I do give Eddie Howe some credit for accepting there's going to be questions, there's going to be harsh words coming his way after losing to Sunderland. I think the biggest issue is, though, like we've said earlier in the show, where you could remove Sunderland from the top corner of your screen and apply this manner of defeat to several other games this season. There is also an argument to say you could apply Eddie Howe's words to 3 or 4 other games as well. And I think that's probably one of the biggest frustrations for fans, is that we've heard it before and we're not seeing the response. And that is a concern. Now, you mentioned earlier in the show, Mark, about the fact that we know how good Eddie Howe is on the training ground. He's fantastic, isn't he? And that's where we'll see some improvement. Well, he's now got 3 weeks till the next game, and he has now got 6 or 7 days between every single remaining game. Does that put more pressure on Eddie Howe, because he's essentially getting the environment, the calendar, the schedule, which we all know he's good at turning teams into good teams, but he doesn't really have much room for error, does he?
So I was double checking the stats on this one, but before Christmas, up until the Leeds game, the 4-3, Newcastle lost 1 game at home this season in the league, which was against Arsenal when they went ahead, by the way. Since that Leeds game, they've lost 4 of the 5. Now, I will say they deserve credit for the Man United one, because obviously playing with 10 men. My biggest concern is why that drop off. why have they dropped off so significantly at home, where it's traditionally been a stronghold? You know, it's always been where they've built a solid foundation, and it's a big drop off. Now, to answer what you're saying about the training ground, a lot of the players are going to be away anyway. We just found out just before we started recording, Harvey Barnes is another one just being called up the England squad.
But the distance between Premier League games when they come back is where he usually shows himself as what he is, a very good manager on the training pitch.
Yeah, he does, but he can't do much if there's not many of the squad there. But
no,
I know what you're saying. I know.
When things restart,
no,
I
get that.
There
will be. Yeah, they play week to week, don't they? Then instead of playing 2-3 games a week. So he has a lot to prove, and not just to the players or the fans. Well, actually, not just to the fans, but to the players. And I'd argue himself. I think I always remember being in a press conference, a pre-match one before one of the Carabao Cup games during the year that Newcastle got to the final the first time, and everything was going great. And I remember saying, Eddie, when my question came around, has your confidence in your own ability as a manager, as a coach, has that grown with the results that you've gained this season? I think you can flip that now. Is there any doubt in his own methods? Is there any doubt in his own ability to get an improvement, to get Newcastle back to where they want to be in terms of that intensity, that energy, that physicality in there? 3 home games left this season: Bournemouth, Brighton, West Ham. Bournemouth and Brighton have good records at Newcastle. West Ham could well go into that game needing a win. Well, I think they will probably need to get a result to stay in the Premier League, or at least give themselves a chance to do so. They're not gimmies. And Newcastle have some really tricky away games. Palace will be really tough as well, because you know what they bring. I think it's a really difficult run-in, and this is why I said earlier that I do believe I think they can still get into Europe, but do I think they will? I'm not so sure. And it's because I think confidence and belief is slowly evaporating in what's going on. And the one big thing I would take from what Eddie said, or the way I thought he looked physically and emotionally and mentally drained, and I don't think we've seen that Eddie Howe very many times. The fact that he's still, and I think you've got the quotes, you might have said them there, sorry, about he won't deflect the blame onto his players. I get it, because that's kind of what managers do. And I think Eddie has to take a fair proportion of the blame for what's gone on. But at the same time, his players, I don't think some of them deserve that from Eddie. I don't think they deserve to be shielded from criticism, from question. It speaks volumes for him. I do think there's a big decision line ahead, though. I will say that.
A lot of people are talking about the future of Eddie Howe. You can't lose 2 games to Sunderland in a season and not have those questions asked.
But, sorry.
Go on.
The Derby defeats shouldn't dictate a manager's future. Newcastle's success, progress, whatever you want to call it, shouldn't be dictated by whatever Sunderland are doing. Same way around, by the way. Sunderland beating Newcastle twice in the Derby shouldn't define their season. This is my problem with the 2 clubs. Your season should be defined by what your goals were. Sunderland have achieved theirs, stayed in the Premier League. They've given themselves a foundation. What were Newcastle's goals going into the season, would you say?
Qualifying for the Champions League, I would argue.
So I would argue it's a pretty fair chance that's not going to happen now.
No.
To go on to what I think you're going to say about Eddie Howe's future, ultimately, those at the top of the club, PIF, David Hopkinson, whoever else, they have to decide if they believe Eddie Howe can reinvigorate this squad with new signings and on the training pitch. They have to decide if he can do that and progress the club again. There's a lot of questions over whether he's got enough credit in the bank because of the Carabao Cup win, because of qualifying for the Champions League, because of reaching the last 16 of this season's competition. They have to decide if he's the man that can take them on to the next level. Now, if you're going to come out with comments about challenging for major honours on a regular basis and being one of the biggest clubs in the world by 2030, you've got to be ruthless. And I'm not saying he should or shouldn't go, but this has left Newcastle with some major decisions to make this summer. And I think that starts at the very top. They have to put an infrastructure in place that can help a manager, a head coach, whoever's in there. They have to get the recruitment stronger and get it right. And they have to make that decision early about whether Eddie is the man to take the club forward. Even more importantly is, if he isn't, they have to make an appointment of a manager who they feel can. And it's difficult because no one at the club has made that decision yet. You know, PIF, since it came in, there was one appointment, which was Eddie.
I was going to say, and I've said it previously in the show, that, you know, it's not just about losing to Sunderland. That kind of accelerates the criticism and makes the question even louder when it is being asked. That's fine. I think Eddie Howe is safe. I certainly don't think he's going to go anywhere while the season is still to finish. I think one thing that puts him in a little bit of danger is the fact that they're losing games in the same fashion.
Yeah.
A lot of the games they've lost this season haven't been down to the opposition being good or a pure amount of quality where even as an opposition fan, you sit back and you go, wow, what a goal that was. A lot of the goals they've conceded have been the same old schoolboy errors. And I think Eddie Howe has got a huge run of games coming up to show that he's learning from these mistakes. And the players as well have to take some responsibility. But then that comes back to the manager, where he has to be getting them focused and getting them, you know, up for the game and tailoring them and molding them, because there's obviously something's not working at the moment. You know, we come on every week and we criticize them for letting the man run or they're not marking and what have you. And that is the responsibility of both Eddie Howe and the players, and they've got to regroup. They've got to get together, because I still believe the players are playing for this manager. I still think Eddie Howe is the right man to lead Newcastle United forward, but it is a big end to the season, because even if he is in charge come the next campaign, which I think he will be, you need to finish this season strongly, because the last thing you want is going into a new campaign having to win the first 5 or 6 games, because if you don't, because you finished last season badly, straight away the scrutiny is going to be on you. So he needs to finish the season strongly to make sure that he gives himself and the players the best platform possible to go into the new campaign in really positive, good spirits. And that is the challenge that awaits him, to show that he's learning from the mistakes, that he can right the errors that are they're not even creeping at Newcastle's game. They're just there. You know, this is just part of how Newcastle play now. There's 7 games to turn it around for me. Will he do it? On one hand, I actually think if you could get the season to end tomorrow, I think he might take that as well, because it feels like Newcastle United are at that point where they just need the season to finish now and allow Eddie Howe, you know, 4 months on the training pitch to work with the players he's got, new recruitment, and then start the season afresh, you know, in a few months' time. That's not going to happen, but it's a horrible position I think Newcastle United are in now.
Yeah. Sometimes I do think fresh eyes on a squad can help. And that's not me saying I think I should go or not, or stay or whatever. Sometimes they'll come to a natural end as well. And maybe both parties might get the end of the season and think that. I'm not saying they will, but, you know, maybe they will get the end of the season. It'll be the right move for both to part ways. It's a difficult one because, again, and I know there's a lot of fans in the aftermath of yesterday, and they've got an absolute right to that opinion, saying that they think Eddie should be moved on and someone else should be brought in. I'd be interested to see who they think should come in. And that's not me saying there's no one out there. It's just that nobody immediately springs to mind for me. I mean, I've spoken about people like Iraola possibly being a decent replacement, but at the same time, I think he'll probably go to a bigger club at some point. But I hope he still retains that belief in himself, because I think what Eddie Howe's done for Newcastle it's been spectacular. When you look where we were when he took over, 100% nailed on for relegation that season. Everything around the club just felt awful, didn't it? Obviously, prior to the takeover a month earlier. To get Newcastle to 2 Carabao Cup finals and win one of them, to end this long wait for a trophy, to get to 2 Champions League campaigns, to take Newcastle into the last 16, to produce memorable nights against your PSGs and, you know, clubs like that. he's been unbelievable for the club. He really has. And if he was to leave over the near future, I've got no doubt everyone will see beyond the short-term annoyances with him or grievances and will absolutely appreciate everything he's done for the club, because he's been as good a manager as we've had here probably since Sir Bobby Robson. And he's ended that long wait for a win. I don't know. I'm really kind of conflicted on it because of what he's done. I think he just about has enough credit, but there is a massive decision to be made, and people at the top end of the club, it's either a case of you decide to make a change, or you make sure that everything is in place this summer to move on from a horror show of what was last summer and give him the best chance to progress the club again, if you firmly believe he is the man to take the club forward. It's about being decisive, and it's about PIF and the people they put in charge at the club being decisive.
Yeah, I think that's probably what gives him an even bigger chance of keeping his job, is because last summer, obviously, we had all the change at board level with director of football and what have you, that this is really the first chance we're going to get to see everyone working together. But then that goes back to what you've said there. There's a big decision to make, because if you're going to back Eddie Howe, you're going to do it to the tune of quite a few hundred millions, and that's not something that Newcastle United can afford to get wrong this summer, because it will be a massive, massive transfer window. But in the meantime, 7 games to go of this Premier League season. Eddie Howe is going to get the time on the training pitch, which we know he uses to his benefit, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he can find that spark to kick Newcastle United into gear. Is European football too far of a stretch? Most probably, but at least let's finish the season on a high with some victories, with some good football, and go into the summer thinking about happier times. Thank you very much for tuning in. Do get into the comments and let us know your thoughts on anything that we've discussed today, and we'll catch you guys very soon.